Is there any historical evidence for the existence of Muhammad? Thank you and God bless.
Yeah, this is actually a tricky issue. I had a debate with Robert Spencer, who came out with a book on whether Muhammad existed. And so I take the affirmative position. I believe that Muhammad existed, and I accept the general Islamic timeline, that Muhammad's born around 570, that he comes to believe he's a prophet around 610, that the Muslim community migrates around 622, and that Muhammad dies around 632. So I believe the general picture there, but there are problems with it. The main problem is Muhammad is supposedly going around challenging all these political leaders and so on, and causing this big ruckus. And he's fighting all these wars and taking over Arabia, when, if you look at the documents of the time, no one's ever heard of the guy. No one's ever heard of him. No one cares about Mecca. No one mentions Mecca. No one cares about anything that's going on in there. And so Muhammad is supposedly, according to Muslim sources, causing this big ruckus, and no one's even heard of him. So there's this big gulf of information for that first century of Islam that there should be tons of references. Keep in mind, he's not like a carpenter. He's not a Jewish carpenter, where we have a ton of early sources for Jesus. We have a ton of early sources. Who is he? He's a carpenter. He's a carpenter who walked around with some followers and then got crucified. We have a bunch of sources for him. Muhammad is supposedly this military figure who's conquering, and no one mentions him. So, you do have a couple of references, but they just don't even fit with the Muslim time frame. So that is a problem. And so what I actually did in my debate, and I have to acknowledge it is hard to defend the existence of Muhammad. I had to argue based on secondary principles that since we don't have early sources, that's the main thing you'd be looking for from a historical perspective: early sources, independent sources, things like that. I had to argue on secondary principles, like the principle of embarrassment. I had to base my case on, if people were making up this story about Muhammad, they wouldn't have included all this horribly embarrassing material, which was definitely embarrassing even to the Muslim community, because they keep trying to explain away all these horrible things that he did. And I had to argue that if they were inventing it, then they wouldn't have invented all this embarrassing material that was embarrassing to them. Therefore, this material is probably true, and therefore I'd have to say that he existed. So in short, there's no way Muslims would invent stories about Muhammad delivering verses from the devil. That's in the Muslim sources, right? That Muhammad delivered revelations that came from Satan, and Satan tricked him into delivering revelations. They wouldn't invent a story about Muhammad thinking that he was demon possessed. They wouldn't invent stories about Muhammad becoming suicidal and trying to hurl himself off a cliff. They would not invent all of these things. And therefore, the only real explanation historically that I can see is that Muhammad did these things, and Muslims were reluctantly recording them. But that means that Muhammad existed. So that's how I would argue.